welcome back to the Skating Penguin Network. I am Garrett Bahana. Alongside me for this trade deadline recap episode we are doing is Snail. Snail, let's not waste any time here. Let's get right into it and talk about perhaps the biggest fish at this year's trade deadline, that being Jake Guentzel. At the conclusion of Thursday night's game against the Washington Capitals, Jake Guentzel was traded to the Carolina Hurricanes for a very large package of forwards and a couple of conditional picks. So let's go through it here and talk the details, and then we'll break everything down. The Penguins acquired forwards Michael Bunting. Let me see if I can ace these names here. Prospect Ville Koivunen, another forward prospect Vasily Ponomarev, and Cruz Lucius, I believe, is the other prospect, in addition to a conditional 2024 first-round pick and a 2024 fifth-round pick in exchange for Jake Guentzel and AHL defenseman Ty Smith.
I forgot about Ty Smith.
Me too. I remember when Hextall traded, that was part of the Marino trade, which I still think is one of the worst things to happen over the last 5 years of this franchise. But even then, Smith is now out of the organization, as is, it's not even an argument. Jake Guentzel is Sidney Crosby's greatest ever winger. He leaves the Penguins as the 11th all-time point scorer in franchise history. The immediate reaction, I saw this trade get announced basically in real time at the conclusion of that Capitals game. Snail, I'm sure you did too. The immediate online reaction was that general manager Kyle Dubas did not get nearly enough that many thought Jake Guentzel was worth. A lot of prospect writers and people that I follow and respect consider these three prospects to be mid-tier level prospects. None of them are going to be projected as game breakers at the NHL level. We're towards the middle of the pack in terms of Carolina's 19th ranked prospect pool, according to some outlets. I believe The Athletic was one of them that ranked Carolina as the 19th best prospect pool across the league. I mean, that's not saying a lot if you're the Penguins, because the Penguins haven't had a prospect pool to build around for the last several years, being in win now mode. Snail, this trade, take away the names that were acquired, and Jake Guentzel, it was almost a foregone conclusion that Jake Guentzel was going to be traded. But I remember Kyle Dubas saying in his press conference about a month ago that the Penguins wanted quality over quantity in terms of getting younger players. And this, to me, feels like it was the exact opposite of what he spoke about a month ago. This is literally quantity over quality with these mid-level prospects. These prospects are probably a few years away from making a real difference at the NHL level. I believe Ponomarev is the closest one. I believe he skated in a couple of games with the Carolina Hurricanes this season, registering a goal and an assist at 21 years old. So he will be assigned to the AHL Wilkes-Barre Penguins. But the general consensus, Snail, as I hand the microphone over to you now, is that general manager Kyle Dubas did not get nearly enough for the return of a two-time 40-goal scorer and perhaps the biggest fish at this trade deadline market, Jake Guentzel. So what are your thoughts?
Well, first, I just want to say, I don't know if you saw it or not, Jake being the biggest fish on the market. Did you see the comments out of Jim Rutherford and Alvin saying that they were in on all these people, but there just wasn't really enough good players out there for them to be in on? Basically, they didn't make any more moves because there weren't any good players left on the market.
That's kind of ridiculous. I don't buy that for a sec, especially coming from the mouth of Jim Rutherford. We were texting, we were talking yesterday when we were recording that mailbag episode. I was convinced when Jim Rutherford wants his guy, he typically gets him. And when Vancouver basically backed out of negotiations late last night, I was like, oh, I don't know what's going to happen. So Guentzel, it's an in-division trade. The Penguins don't even get a traditional first-round pick. The conditional pick becomes a first-round pick if Carolina reaches the Stanley Cup final. Otherwise, that pick reverts to the Philadelphia Flyers second-round pick, which the Carolina Hurricanes own. So Jake Guentzel, a two-time 40-goal scorer, one of the purest snipers in the game today, cannot even go for a traditional first-round pick, whereas Sean Monahan, how many weeks ago was that now? Sean Monahan got traded for a 2024 first-round pick with no conditions attached to it. Make that make sense. I know Jake Guentzel's contract was going to expire at the end of the season, and many teams probably looked at that as a pure rental. And maybe Jake Guentzel has full intention of hitting the open market to see what he's worth come July 1st. But even then, I mean, Sean Monahan's contract expires at the end of the season, for crying out loud. And you're telling me Jake Guentzel can't go for at least a first-round pick? Now, we may never know what these other teams offered Kyle Dubas, but considering the reception that Dubas got from several reputable prospect writers that I follow and respect, it left a lot to be desired when that trade came down late last night.
Oh my God. And you know what? I had a feeling that this was going to happen. I keep thinking about that Sean Monahan deal up in Canada and how he got a first round. I think it was a first and a conditional third. These conditional picks, like these general managers are such penny pinchers. It's their job to be penny pinchers and be stingy. Protect the assets that you of your organization. But um, when I saw Bunting's name out there, Bunting is a decent player. I would say he's a middle six at best. He was um he's kind of a piss and vinegar type player, maybe cut from a similar cloth of like I'm not even gonna say Hornquist. I would say he's more of like a rat, like a Nick Cousins or a and I mean that with the most respect. Like a Nick Cousins or like a Marchand light or a Bertuzzi light. I don't know. He's kind of cut from that cloth, so I'm all for that kind of player coming to Pittsburgh. But what I was saying was when I saw him as the guy being sat out of the lineup, I'm like, well, that's weird. Why isn't Marty Necas sitting out? Or like, why isn't
Seth Jarvis. Like,
Seth Jarvis? What about
know?
Svechnikov? Why are those
Yes.
guys not sitting out? They must have some blue chip prospect that, and I start looking through their prospect pool,
Yep.
and I'm not going to be like everyone else on Twitter who all of a sudden a trade happens and I'm an expert. I've watched every game these prospects have played and I know their whole game. I'm not going to act like that because you see that too. All of a sudden, everyone's an expert.
I have made the point very clear on this podcast that I am no prospect expert. And I even said when we started recording this that it'll be a few years until you get the full grasp of what these players turn into. I'm just going by what some writers who have a reputation that precedes them of being scout / prospect writers. There are some people that I follow that I respect. But to your point, yeah, everyone comes out of the woodwork when these trades are made and either overrates or underrates these prospects. That's a good going back to Michael Bunting. That's a good comparison, one that I saw quite a bit online last night too. I don't think he will be as offensively productive maybe as Patrick Hornquist was in the top six. I think his ceiling is a top 9 forward. Ideally, you have him as a very good bottom 6 forward, but he's probably going to play top 6 minutes given the injuries the Penguins have and the lack of production that they have gotten out of a lot of their players. But I think Patrick Hornquist is a fair comparison in that I think Bunting will drive to the net. He will get his nose dirty. He will have, maybe he becomes that net front presence that the Penguins have really lacked since Patrick Hornquist left. I remember Jake Guentzel was sort of that semi-net front presence, but he would always get the crap beat out of him because he was diminutive in stature, and it was like I don't know if that role really fits him because he's always getting the crap punched out of him in front of the goalie. But so maybe Bunting comes in and fills that role. But being the main piece of that trade, here's one of the questions that I want to ask you, Snail. Do you think it is funny? Maybe funny is not the right word, But Michael Bunting obviously has a long history with Kyle Dubas, going back to his junior days, if I'm
Sault
not
Ste.
mistaken.
Marie.
Exactly. So, are you surprised that Kyle Dubas once again went after one of his quote unquote guys because he's brought in Nola Chari from Toronto? Now he goes after Bunting. Are you surprised that Bunting became basically the NHL centerpiece of this trade?
Not at all. The second I saw Bunting sitting out, because I was aware of the noise around the Maple Leafs acquiring Michael Bunting from Arizona a few years ago. The second I saw that, it was like, I mean, I'm actually honestly shocked that there hasn't been some Sault Ste. Marie boys brought into the Penguins organization already. I don't know why it took him this long, because that is his like MO. He loves his Ontario boys. Um, on his team. He likes that familiarity. And Garrett, I gotta ask you, I don't know if that's. I used to think that that was like a strength. I was like, oh, he knows these guys. He knows what these guys can bring. But with that reputation, and especially regarding this trade, I'm wondering if that's a weakness of Kyle Dubas's. And that could be a whole longer conversation than we need to get into now. But I just am wondering, like, we'll never know what the other options were offered to the Penguins, what the other trade offers looked like from the Rangers. We heard that, trade talks intensified, and Vancouver, they were hanging around until I think midday yesterday or something like that. So, um, I don't know about him bringing in a guy just because he knows him. I think I had texted the group chat, if you wanted Michael Bunting, I mean, this guy isn't a 30 goal scorer, top 10 overall pick, or he's not even like a Kapanen or like a Galchenyuk when the Penguins had first acquired him. He didn't even really he's not even bringing a similar pedigree to that. If you wanted Michael Bunting, isn't there another player on the Penguins roster that you probably could have used as a bargaining chip to pry him away from Carolina? I would guess probably.
I was going to say, like, you're telling me, I know Riley Smith has struggled this year, but you're telling me you couldn't formulate a trade basically swapping Riley Smith, maybe, and saving a little bit of money in the process. Get a change of scenery for Riley Smith. It hasn't worked out here in Pittsburgh as it did in Vegas. Like, you're telling me the framework of a potential Michael Bunting trade couldn't center around Riley Smith or Lars Eller, who teams really prioritize that, like, defensive veteran grit that a guy like Lars Eller could bring. I'm surprised, and we could get into this conversation in a little bit. I am so surprised that out of the trades the Penguins made, goaltender Alex Nedeljkovic is still on this roster. Riley Smith is still on this roster. Lars Eller is still on this roster. I am surprised. Noel Chari, maybe to a lesser extent. I'm surprised that out of the only moves that the Penguins made, and they made three of them, we'll talk about them. Guentzel obviously was the biggest one. They ship out Chad Ruhwedel for a 2027 fourth round pick to the New York Rangers, and they shipped out the AHL goaltender Magnus Hellberg to the Florida Panthers for a conditional 2025 seventh round pick and another minor league goaltender, Ludovic Weber. I'm going to go with that's how you pronounce it. But I mean, yeah, Michael Bunting to me, I think his ceiling is top nine, but I think he is best suited as a very, very solid bottom six player. I think he's probably going to get power play time, considering the power play has struggled this season. He's probably going to get a chance on Sidney Crosby's wing, because Jake Guentzel is now gone.
Yeah, it's a free for all. Who won't get a shot at Sid's wing at this point?
Yeah, exactly. So I
one thing about Bunting I wanted to say, I read his quotes from. He's already in Pittsburgh practicing. When he was asked about what he thinks about coming to Pittsburgh and what he's going to bring, the first thing he said was he's a net front guy. He likes to go to the net. He can help out on the power play by being that net front guy. I have a lot of appreciation for a blue collar type player who plays in the bottom six, but when it's special teams time, he goes and he's a pest in front of the net. Another thing that I know about Bunting that he didn't mention, but this is his reputation, is he draws a lot of penalties. Now, that's really good when you have a power play that can frickin' score. And at this point, the Penguins get all the reps they need on the power play. They're a team that draws a fair amount of penalties. I don't want to turn this into a power play rant. I was about to head there, but I'm going to cut myself off from that. He draws a lot of penalties, and if he can be a shit stir in front of the net and bang in some greasy goals, that's something we've been asking for a long time. Now, I don't want to get into too many hypotheticals because I'm typically really all for hypotheticals, but with the climate of the team and everything right now, I'm just not in the mood for it. But I will say, if they can acquire Bunting, who I believe is under contract, is he, or I hope I'm not speaking wrong. I think he has a year.
He's under contract through the end of next season.
Next season. That's what I thought. Okay, so if they can get a guy like Bunting, who um is a piece of a player I think the Penguins could really use, and then they re-sign Guentzel in the offseason and Dubas pays him, then that's a whole different aspect of this trade that might be like a big dub for Dubas. Some getting a guy like Bunting. The prospects, I mean, dude, looking at these guys, I'm not going to act like I know who they are. I did a lot of digging on them though last night and early this morning. Cruz Lucius, his scouting report, he's an American. He's from Minnesota, plays for University of Wisconsin. I what I read his scouting reports, his college level scouting reports, is like he can't really skate that well, and he's like a flashy kind of offensive player. He is not seen as someone who's ever going to be in the NHL. He's probably like an East Coast Hockey League guy, career guy. Vasily Ponomarev and Vili Koivunen. I mean, dude, to me, looking at kind of the numbers they're putting up in their respective leagues, I feel like we just have two more Valtteri Pustinens in the farm system at this point.
I think, I mean, like I mentioned, it's I don't know if it's necessarily fair to judge these young prospects, but a comparable of Valtteri Puustinen to both of these guys, I think that could be fair. Like if you want to cast your mind into the future and look at what they're projected to be, I think that's a fair comparable. That's not necessarily a good thing because I was hoping for at least an organization's like number one or number two prospect if you're giving away Sidney Crosby's best ever line mate. And the fact that you really didn't get that, you really like I describe them as like mid-tier prospects. And 5 years from now, we could come back and look at this trade, and like these three players could be NHL regulars. Just judging off what some prospect writers I know are saying, it doesn't look like that's realistically going to be the case. So that's why, going back to the return for what they got for Guentzel, it leaves me incredibly underwhelmed. I know a lot of people the morning after now are calling for Dubas's head and saying, it's time to already move on. And he hasn't even completed his first full season under the Penguins banner. I don't know if I'm ready to sound that alarm and be that dramatic. I'm willing to give Dubas the flexibility and the benefit because going into this summer, the 2024 summer, he will have at least 15 million or so to work with. That's not counting any other moves that he may make at the NHL draft or during free agency. He could still trade Lars Eller. He could still trade Riley Smith. Both of those players are under contract through the end of next season, I believe. So trades still could be made to free up more salary cap space. I will be, and everyone else will be watching Dubas very closely this summer to see what kind of players he brings in because he preaches and preaches and preaches about getting younger and surrounding the Penguins with younger, better high-end players. Will we see that in action? I don't know. I don't know yet.
Michael Bunting is almost exactly 1 year younger than perennial 30-goal scorer Jake Guentzel. So he accomplished that. The quantity over quality, or quality over quantity, like that was literally a quote from Dubas's
From
mouth.
Dubas, yes.
And I feel like, I mean, I would have, I don't know. It's like we'll never know what the other deals were, but I'm curious if this is really the best that you can kind of salvage. And if the Penguins are at this point, I mean, they're not making the playoffs. I mean, they're not, like, unless like I looked at the wild card standings. I think they're 10 points out of a playoff spot. it's like they have 21 games left. I think they would have to essentially win. Let's just say they need to win the majority of those games. Uh, God, I forgot where I was going with this. What was I saying, Garrett?
What were you saying?
I was looking at this thing and I got super distracted trying to do math.
The Penguins are 10 points out of a playoff spot. They'd have to win the majority. But yeah, you're right. They'd have to win the majority of those games to even entertain the thought of maybe clinching a spot. The season, for all intents and purposes, is over. I mentioned to you, I think, before we started recording. Go ahead.
I remember now. If your season is going this direction anyway, and I mean, like realistically, I mean, players in that room, other than maybe Sid, who he seems just dead set on pulling this team into the playoffs with his plays, like at any cost. Why not just keep Guentzel? And I mean, if he wants to test free agency, I mean, it seems like he was gonna test it anyways. The return, I don't know if this return really puts you in like that much better of a spot. Maybe if he stays, you have a little bit better chance of re-signing him. I don't know why I feel that way, but maybe if he finishes the season, Dubas can go to him and pitch like, look, there's still time to make some move. Maybe this deadline, if you kept Guentzel and he reshaped the roster a bit more at this deadline and just got whatever he could for some people, maybe you go in and you're like, we have this much cap space. This is what we're thinking to do. I don't know. It doesn't sound like Guentzel was really super high on leaving. Sid, it sounds like he was very puzzled as to why Jake was leaving. I just wonder if keeping him wasn't the worst idea. It was looking at this underwhelming return. Do you feel that way at all, Garrett?
I understand the thought of trading and getting something for him as opposed to letting him walk on July 1st. And there's always the possibility that he never resigns and you just let a 2-time 40-goal scorer walk out of your organization for literal zero, for nothingness. So I understand wanting to get something out of if Guentzel is not coming back. And that's a whole nother question that I have to ask, whether rhetorical or otherwise, is Guentzel, for all we know, everything that was reported from beat writers and folks on the inside was that Jake Guentzel did not want to leave Pittsburgh. He had settled down. He is a father, a husband now. He had settled down. Obviously, he has indescribable chemistry with Sidney Crosby. If he did not want to leave, now we haven't been obviously privy to the details of contract negotiations between Dubas and Guentzel's representatives, but if he did not want to leave Pittsburgh, you'd think there would be a sense of urgency from at least one of those sides to come to some sort of agreement, if not Guentzel and Dubas's side, to get something done. If Guentzel wanted to stay here, I don't doubt that Guentzel did not want to leave. I think he did want to stay and really play with Crosby. And there is the tinfoil hat conspiracy theorist in me that thinks, all right, if he doesn't sign an extension, maybe on July 1st, maybe Dubas is playing like 5D chess. He trades Guentzel can go have a chance at winning a cup. He comes back on July 1st, and it's like we ship Guentzel away and we got some prospects and a couple of draft picks in return for a short-term Guentzel absence. I don't necessarily know if Guentzel will come back. I'm sort of split, and the pessimist in me probably says that he might test the open market and never come back here. So that's a conversation we can have at another point if he doesn't sign an extension. But if you're Guentzel and if you're Dubas, like he is openly saying he doesn't want to go anywhere. Now, Sidney Crosby, like you mentioned, Snail, was visibly not frustrated or irritated, but he was perplexed at why Guentzel, of all people, had to leave. Dubas's quest to get younger. It's not like Jake Guentzel was 36 years old and that long in the tooth. Like, that's a player that you could build around in the post-Crosby era. So I don't know. There are so many things going around in my head right now about like the possibility of Jake coming back, or the return that you did get for Jake Guentzel? Why didn't you offer a serious contract extension to him in the first place? Because we had heard rumors that, some feelers were sent out to Guentzel's camp, but no serious negotiations ever took place. So there are a lot of things still swirling around in my head. I'm sure even by the time the summer rolls around, we're going to have more questions than answers going back to this trade. But I'm still just as puzzled as a lot of Penguins fans are for the return and how this whole trade went down from start to finish. Because, Snail, I know I keep saying you keep trying to chime in, and I don't want to cut you off anymore, because the Penguins didn't have to be in this position. The Penguins absolutely did not have to trade Jake Guentzel. They could have kept him on the roster, like you mentioned, Snail. They could have absolutely continued to negotiate contract negotiations with him, because Jeff Carter's contract was coming off the books. They were already by default going to have like roughly $15 million in salary cap to work with. The salary cap is going to incrementally go up, so that's only going to benefit the Penguins. It just doesn't make sense why the Penguins go down this route of openly claiming they want to get younger and trading one of the best players to ever play here. It doesn't make, a lot of things don't make sense to me at this point.
Dude, it doesn't make sense. Like, with how aggressive Dubas is, with like the type of GM he is, you're telling me that he wasn't able to talk contracts with Guentzel in his camp. I know some players shut that down during the season. I know that was just kind of an issue over in Vancouver with Elias Pettersson. He was like adamant about not talking extension, but with it being a Canadian market and where they're at in the standings, I think that he was finally like, all right, we're kind of sliding. The noise is a lot right now. Enough is enough. Let's get something done. I just Dubas is a he's a pistol, man. He's a mover and a shaker. It's just the lack of urgency to maybe get something done before the trade deadline doesn't really add up to me. I mean, we saw what he did with Karlsson. I mean, he moved heaven and earth to get that done. You just have to think that maybe Dubas was a little horny for a trade. Not to get too into off topic here, but in therapy right now, I've learned to use I statements to kind of express the story in my head of where things are at. I just know that I heard Dubas in Toronto a lot talking about wanting to shake up the core, trade a core piece. I feel like he was horny to make a trade. I feel like Dubas gets horny for trades. He's kind of like a Jim Rutherford, you know? And so the story that I'm kind of putting together in my head is that I think Dubas wanted to make, he wants to leave a mark on this team a bit, maybe. He wants to shake up the team in his own image. And unfortunately, I just feel like with the way that the team has been sliding in the season going, the prime opportunity for him to make a big splash yet again at a big time during the season, the trade deadline, was to trade Guentzel and bring in one of his guys from Sault Ste. Marie that he acquired in Toronto when he was there. And that's kind of tinfoil hat-ish. Who knows? These general managers, you never get anything out of them. It's all a lot of, they leave a lot for speculation, which I feel like it would actually benefit them a little bit. I'm not saying show their cards, but like a little more transparency would probably help kind of calm the masses a bit. It'd give us a hell of a lot more to talk about for sure. And there's a couple other trades he made that I feel like were, not as flashy as this, that we can probably get into here soon, because we've spent a lot of time on Guentzel. The last thing I'll say about Guentzel is I see a lot of back and forth online right now about people wondering, will he maybe he'll resign. It never happens. Like, one of my favorite players of all time, Jarome Iginla, was the captain of the Calgary Flames, and then he came to Pittsburgh at the trade deadline. You guys all remember that, and he never went back. So I wonder if and that was with Sid. They connected on the golden goal. Team Canada, there was a lot of pull from Sid, and Jerome wanted to move on. Hossa didn't come back with the pull of Sid, and they had instant chemistry. I am doubtful Jake re-signs with Pittsburgh, but just with the fact that he didn't really want to leave, there's probably there's a part of me, and I think in every fan, there's probably a little bit of them holding on to hope that this chemistry with Sid and the pull of Sidney Crosby and the twilight of his career, maybe he resigns. And if that's the case, then hats off to Dubas for getting a type of player that the Penguins do in fact need on the power play in their middle six, bottom six, wherever he ends up slotting. I could see him being on a bully line with Malkin, those two out there pricking it up. But if you get Guentzel back, great job. But I just think that no Penguins fan should be prepared for that. I think that Dubas seems to have other plans. So I don't know. That's all I got on the Guentzel trade. We could get into I called this. I called Ruhwedel being traded. I called it on. I think the last time I recorded with either you guys or maybe it was with Robbie doing a game recap. Chad Proweedle. I think his name's on the cup. He did a third pairing defenseman. Always could be counted on when the injury bug strikes the Penguins. He's going to the New York Rangers for a 4th round pick. What do you remember most about Chad Ruhwedel, and will he be missed?
Chad Ruhwedel, the first thing that comes to mind when I think of Chad Ruhwedel is professional. That's the first word that comes to mind. Ruhwedel was never going to be a top pairing defenseman. And that's the thing I respected about him because he'd been here. Rutherford signed him, I think, in the 2017 offseason. Let me see if the Penguins website. I don't think the Penguins website has anything immediately that I can see regarding Ruhwedel's tenure, but he is a Jim Rutherford era holdover, and everything just screamed consummate professional. He is the ideal 6/7 defenseman 32 out of 32 teams would want on their roster. He could sit in the press box for 60 straight games, and when injury struck, he would come in. Again, you're never going to give him big time minutes. You don't want to. I don't think he understood. He understood his ceiling. The Penguins understood his ceiling. He understood his role. He was never going to come in and replace Chris Letang. But at the bottom of your defense pairings, maybe on the third pair, occasionally bump him up into the second pair if injury dictated it. He was always going to give it his all. He never looked out of place. Like I said, he could miss 60 straight games, come in the next game after injury, and look like he never missed a beat. That to me is a good soldier. Because I'm sure these players, like the drive and the drive of professional hockey players and professional athletes, they want to be playing this game that they're getting paid for. And it can't be easy for many guys to take on that role of being in the press box, being that number 7 defenseman who may not play every night. You may not play for 40 straight games, but he was always there, always ready to fill in when you asked him to. He probably won't go down in Penguins history as anything special, but for those who are going to have fond memories of this era of the 16 and 17 cup wins and everything that came after that, Chad Ruhwedel, a consummate pros pro, just a good all-around defensive hockey player.
He also is, I believe, the baldest hockey player of this era.
He has one of the shiniest domes, absolutely.
So he came in 2000, the off season in 2016-17. He played 28 games with Wilkes-Barre, and then he came up and played 34 games with the Penguins, registering 2 goals and 8 assists, and he played 6 playoff games, registering absolutely nothing but 4 penalty minutes. So his name is on the cup.
As it should be, as it absolutely
as it should be. I knew he would get moved because he's a right shot D, and we all know how this league values a right shot defenseman.
Absolutely.
He's a bottom pair guy, but I don't want to go out and say he's shown glimpses because I'm not trying to go there with Chad Proweedle, as they call him, but I've seen him score some like nasty goals kind of out of nowhere. Like I've seen him kind of absolutely unleash the puck and have himself a hell of a game. I think he scored like 2 goals one time in St. Louis. I've seen him just barrel down the his off wing and just absolutely snipe one. He can move the puck. He's a more of a defensive guy though. So I mean, around playoff time, what team doesn't want? And at his cap hit, which I don't know what he's making, I don't know what he gets paid. It's probably he's 5'11", not the biggest guy. He's 33 years old. I just was like, he's gonna be a team's Mark Streit or Ron, maybe not Ron Hainsey because that was quite the big story. He never played a playoff game, then won the cup. But he's going to be one of those depth guys that there's always injuries in the playoffs. He's probably going to get a few looks during a game, and all the better to him. And then the other guy I wanted to bring up was Magnus Hellberg. Welcome to Hellberg population, Magnus. He had a couple of great starts for the Penguins. We barely knew ye, and he's off to Florida for a name that I was having a hard time pronouncing. I think it's like Weber or Weber.
Yeah, I was looking at it too, and the last thing I want to do is come on here and butcher somebody's name. Let me see. Okay, yeah, it's Magnus Hellberg to the Florida Panthers for a goaltender. I'm gonna go with and stick with Ludovic Weber. I'm gonna say Ludovic Weber and a conditional 2025 seventh round pick.
Not bad for, I guess, I don't know, for Magnus is a well-traveled veteran goaltender.
That he is. That he is.
And I think one thing I took away from his interviews when he had a little bit of time up with the Penguins during injuries, he seems like a great guy, great personality.
Bro is absolutely massive too. I think he's what, like 6'6",
It's like
6'7"?
6'7", I think, or something like that.
So yeah, good. You know what I will say? The casual fan, or maybe the not even the real hockey fan, will look at that and laugh at a guy like Magnus Hellberg for bouncing around so many times and being with so many different professional teams. You know what I call that? I call that steady employment. If you can
Oh
get it,
yeah.
absolutely, you should be able to hang your hat on having employment like that for this long, playing a kid's game and getting paid as much as you are, even in the role in the AHL. Absolutely, like hats off to you. Like you said, Snail, we hardly knew ye, as he was a year zero Kyle Dubas acquisition earlier this past summer, and he's already been flipped to the Florida Panthers.
And they're looking to make a run, so you never know if they have injury woes. Magnus Hellberg might get some meaningful looks in their depending on how far they go. To your point too, to play hockey and travel the world like he did and get paid to do it, and just he's a goalie and he might not even be playing every night. So yeah, hats off to a guy like Magnus Hellberg. I'm sure next year he will get a video tribute when he signs with some team as their third string, and he's going to come back to PPG. He's going to get a little video tribute, and I'll be all for it. I think is that all the trades that happened regarding they still have Riley Smith, who
Yes.
has to be pissed. I don't think he's happy in Pittsburgh.
He doesn't look happy in Pittsburgh. It's never, outside of like the first 10 games of the season, it hasn't worked. I mean, and again, he could be traded at the draft. He could absolutely be traded at the draft or over the summer. But are they going to keep trying to stick this square peg into this round hole?
Probably. I don't know. It's tough because Riley Smith was given up for nothing to the Vegas Golden Knights in the expansion draft. He had been looked over by the Florida Panthers, and he had expressed his thoughts on that. He thought that he was never given a fair shake. I think that the Riley Smith we saw in Vegas, which was a bunch of, as they say, misfits, punching way above their weight class, they had an amazing run their first year, and then, they kind of started to regress to the mean. And I think Riley Smith was a first line winger for a lot of that first season. And I think that in their cup run, he was a third liner. And so that was on a very good competitive team. Riley Smith, I think, has had his moments to shine in this league. But as an avid hockey watcher, I guess, I'm not going to say I'm a scout. I'm not trying to say I know Riley Smith personally. But I think what we're seeing this year, we literally got face value Riley Smith. I think this is the kind of player he is. I think on a good team, he's a good third liner. I just don't know if he's a top 6 player that can really play that role consistently. And I don't think anyone would be mad at saying that. I think that Riley Smith, he looks frustrated out there at times. You can see the sulking a little bit, the body language. He's not performing like he wants to. He's playing with Geno Malkin. Like, Malkin's even at his age right now. I mean, Malkin, that's another conversation too. What's going to happen with him? Because some nights he looks 47, not 37. But he's playing with decent players. I'm sure he's had looks with Sid, and Sullivan's not making the choice to put him up on that first line. So regarding Riley Smith, he's a good depth player, but I feel like the Penguins bought high, and it didn't play. It didn't turn out how Dubas and I think all of us imagined.
I wouldn't be as frustrated with Riley Smith's production if he didn't have a cap hit of $5 million. If that cap hit was cut in half, like you said, Snail, and he was put in the bottom six or top nine, third line, whatever, instead of eating those big top 6 minutes, and for whatever reason it hasn't worked with Geno Malkin. If his cap hit was even cut in half, and you get that extra 2.5 million to go spend somewhere else, I probably wouldn't be complaining as much, and I don't think there would be as many fans complaining as much either. It's the fact that Dubas now has either acquired or given a lot of money and term to several of these players. Riley Smith is signed through the end of next season. Noel Acciari is signed, I believe, through the end of next season. Who else? Who else is signed on a Lars Eller? I think is signed for 2 more years after this one. So there are a lot of guys who have multi-year contracts, and also a lot of players who have no movement clauses too. So that's why I said earlier I will be very intrigued to see how Dubas navigates this summer. He got his big fish last year in Erik Karlsson, and then all the depth moves kind of left me scratching my head because they were like seen as defensive first, and they really lacked offense, which you see that in practice now. We're 60 plus games into the season. These forwards are decent defensively, but the Penguins cannot put the puck in the net. So I will be very curious to see what he does to fill out this roster.
I'm curious too. I don't think Riley Smith is the type of player too that's going to come back next year and be James Neal 2.0.
No, absolutely
Um,
not.
I love this stat. I was telling this to Robbie the other day. So you remember Daniel Sprong?
Yeah.
He has he makes $2 million, and he has one less goal than the combined $10 million in Raquel and Riley Smith.
That it may just made me incredibly depressed.
That's a
Like
kick in the pills.
like talk about piss poor asset management. Daniel
He's a third
Sprong,
liner. He's a third liner, sometimes fourth liner on a good Detroit team. He has like 16 goals, and he makes $2 million. I think Riley Smith and Raquel just recently combined for 17 goals between them at 10 million combined.
that hurts my innards very much. Uh Man, I had such hope for just going off topic here as we wrap this up. I had such hope for Daniel Sprong when the Penguins
Oh, me
drafted him.
too, man.
I was like, I was buying everything. I was like, this dude's gonna be slotting alongside Malkin or Crosby for the next 10 years. And you know what? To Sprong's credit, it didn't work out here in Pittsburgh, but he has absolutely carved out a respectable NHL career for himself. He's sort of came into his own as a late bloomer.
A little bit. I think um it was really in Seattle. I mean,
Yes.
he was traded for Marcus Pedersen to Anaheim. He spent
Oh,
some
that's
time in
right. Wow.
Ana-
Yeah.
Anaheim wasn't a good team. They weren't
No.
managing the team to win. So I don't hold those years in Anaheim. I think the one maybe 2 years at most in Anaheim he was there. It was when he was in Seattle that he was a fourth liner, and he scored like 20 goals. I think it was last year. I think he was averaging like 4 minutes of ice a night, and he scored like 20. He had 20 goals last season, and then the Kraken let him go for some reason. They didn't re-sign him. He signed a 1-year contract in Detroit for $2 million. Again, a third liner, sheltered minutes, and he's got 16 goals. And let's see here if I could pull it up quickly. I will, but either way, yeah. I mean, obviously, he's an offensive third liner, kind of a maybe he's like a Phil Kessel extra light right now. I don't know, like he's doing a hell of a lot more than what our third liners are doing. I mean, and he was right under our nose. That's another thing. This team. One thing we talk about asset management. I feel like the Penguins have had some decent depth players that they didn't have the patience to develop. I saw a stat. I think it was this morning, early this morning. It feels like 2 days ago now because I was up at the wee hours tracking trades. The Penguins have now traded their Wilkes-Barre leading scorer like 3 times in the last 5 years.
What is up with Alex Nylander turning into the second coming of Jesus in Columbus?
Dude,
Tell me, how does that make any sense?
I mean, it doesn't, because like you'd think that he would flourish under a system like, Sullivan's system.
Yeah.
He's gonna, with Sid and Malkin, and he was on the power play, but then he goes to a dumpster fire in Columbus with really all their best players out, and he had like 6 points in 2 nights, a hat trick, and then he continued scoring even the next night. It's like I don't get it. What is up with? He's like, is he going to be the next Sprong, or as they called him here in Seattle, Spongy,
SpongeBob SquarePants.
SpongeBob.
Sprong Bob SquarePants. Fantastic.
But yeah, I don't know what's up with that. I think the leading that stat was brought up because they traded Ty Smith, and I think he had 32 points for the Wilkes-Barre Scranton Penguins. So, but he wasn't getting called up anytime soon. You want no patience for that. You're going to put him on the power play and hope that they don't get scored against for the league leading 12th shorthanded goal of the season. I don't think so. But anyways, just interesting stuff to kind of ponder. You look at Daniel Sprong. I'd take him at $2 million with his 16 goals on the second line, replacing Raquel at this point. I think Raquel has 9 goals on the season at $5 million. Not good.
No, not good at all. Snail, as we wrap up, any final thoughts on the 2024 NHL trade deadline? Any final thoughts on the Penguins, where the Penguins go from here?
One quick one. It's just that coming into this season, that Carlson trade, like honestly, like that'll go down in history as like I don't want to say a fleecing, but that was
I'd say it's a fleecing. I'd go as far as to say it's a fleecing.
Yeah, actually, I heard them talking on Trade Center. They were like, I hear Mikael Granlund is being wanted. He's a guy that can really help your team. And I was like, I don't know what you've been smoking or who you've been watching whilst smoking, but
I want some of that good.
Yeah, exactly. That Carlson trade, we were on here just elated that we had a general manager that can pull off these kind of trades. And after this season, the season alone has left me scratching my head. And then this trade deadline, let's just say I'm a little bit more unsure than I've ever been, even with Hextall at general manager.
So that'll be the perfect conclusion to this. I'll pose you one final question. Has the bloom already fallen off the Kyle Dubas rose in Pittsburgh?
I think because Hextall, how he just really messed things up, and Kyle Dubas came in and had to fix that. I think Kyle gets this off season, and he gets till the trade deadline next season to really evaluate his job, because you could count this year, and this is being extremely generous, especially as a Penguins fan base occupier, I mean, he needed a year to fix the stuff that Hextall did. Could we chalk it up to that? Could we be that generous with Kyle? He needs a year to clean up and realign this team with the vision he had when he said Pittsburgh is his new home. Screw you, Toronto. You didn't give me the reins. He told Toronto he's not going to pop up anywhere. Well, guess what? He popped up in Pittsburgh, and he traded for Erik Karlsson, and he turned all of our bad trades that Hextall had gotten done into a Hall of Famer. Let's give him 1 year to right this ship. And would you say that that's too generous, Garrett?
I don't know if I would go as far as next year's trade deadline, but what I will say is I'd probably go as far as the start of next season. I want to see how they start out next season into October 2024 into November. If we're having similar conversations now in October 2024 later this year, then come back to me, and I may give you a more negative opinion of Kyle Dubas. But
Right. And I guess I would quickly add to that it's like I think maybe by the like you said October 2024, are the Penguins really going to be trying to still go for it again, or are they going to be in a reset, a retool, whatever word you want to use to dance around the fact that the Penguins will be losing a lot of games? Let's just put it at that. When I say Dubas needs to right the ship, I'm not saying put us into a playoff contender, a President's Trophy winner. I'm not saying that. I just mean like I want to see the vision, and I want it to be clear, and I want to know that what direction we're heading by then.
Yeah, because if there's one thing to take away from this season so far, it's that, to add on to what you were saying, I don't think it's been, well, I guess you could say it has been directionless. And there have been mixed signals and mixed messages coming from Dubas. Dubas wants to get younger, but apparently also wants to continue to try and chase one more championship. He trades away Jake Guentzel, but one of the best players to ever come through Pittsburgh, and also says he wants to continue to try and compete while Sidney Crosby is still competing at a high level. So really a lot of mixed messaging here, and that's why I'm very curious to see what happens this upcoming offseason.
Me as well. Quickly, one last thing, and then I'll shut up. Is when it comes to the postseason, and obviously, I think it's not rude to say that the Penguins will not be present in the postseason for a second straight year. I think the first time since Sid's been in a Penguin sweater. Um, are we watching Carolina games now?
Um, I want Jake to absolutely succeed. Um, and if that means the Carolina gets to the Stanley Cup final and we get their technically their first round pick, then yeah, I'll be a bandwagon Hurricanes fan to see how far they can go.
I feel like I'll be in. I don't really watch a lot of Carolina games, hardly ever. Like if they're on versus any other team, and I'm looking through ESPN Plus, I'm probably not watching them. But I will be more incentivized to pay more attention. I will say now with Jake there, and you know what? I hope he shoves it where the sun don't shine, and shows Dubas that what, if you want to win a cup, if you want to be competitive, this is what I bring, and you're going to need that ingredient every day of the week and twice on Sunday.
Alrighty. Well, we will wrap up our trade deadline discussion here for Snail. I have been Garrett Bahana. Thank you so much for listening. We will be back again with you next week for more mailbag to answer more of your questions as we now the trade deadline is over and we see how the Penguins finish out the rest of their 2023-24 season. So we will talk to all of you again very soon.